well. There was, I believe, a LinkedIn article that was published regarding how especially the tech industry is struggling with both hiring employees and especially laying off employees as well. So that, I would say, especially keeping in mind for organizations that it's not just important for us to address, okay, how do we get neurodivergent people in the door, but understanding for those that are in the door, they have important advantages that they can offer organizations that are unique. So again, we highlight again that with any sort of neurodivergence, of course it could be a deficit, of course it could be a disadvantage, but on our end, we want to broaden the conversation to make very clear how it could be an advantage.
Hello and welcome back to the NITW Podcast. I'm Associate Director at NITW, Sean Gill. On this show, we like to bring in folks from our team as well as our allies and fellow advocates in the neuroinclusion space to try to share as much knowledge and value to the advocate community as well as the neurodivergent community to share what we know and what is out there in the collective research and practice and application of neuroinclusion efforts in the workplace. And today, for today's episode, I am very excited to have our guest Andrew Millin here, and we're going to talk about a recent paper that Andrew put out, but I will turn it over to him to introduce himself and begin to tell us a little bit about this paper.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean. So great to hear from everyone today. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. I am a neurodivergent PhD candidate over at Florida International University in Miami. I study global leadership and management, and I research leadership and neurodiversity at work.
Perfect. Awesome. And so, yeah, I begin to mention the article that we're here to discuss. And you originally reached out to us a couple months ago just to share that we were mentioned in it and bring a couple of different articles to our attention. We're going to focus in on one in a little bit, but let's give our listeners and viewers a little bit of context of, why were there multiple articles? What's the format? And then in particular, what was your focus in this kind of microcosm of research and writing?
Sounds great. Let's hop right in. So in the academic space, we have a variety of different types of articles that could be published. So for example, we have your classic empirical articles. So in an empirical article, let's say if you want to survey a population and then display those quantitative results and statistics, if you want to interview a population and analyze different quotes and bring up different themes from conversations with employees. So those are examples of empirical articles that we see in scholarship, but we also have non-empirical articles as well. We think about a literature review, for example. That could be a section of an article, but that could also be a whole article in and of itself. In addition to that sort of format, let's get into my publication, which I'm so grateful to talk about today from me and my team. This is from a journal called the Journal of Organizational Behavior. The publication is titled Neurodiversity Right, the Case for Neurodiversity Employment Programs. So myself and then my colleagues, Nikki Drader-Mazza, Katie Badura, Ginny Lopez-Kidwell, and Tim Munyon, we were all authors on this publication together. And this is, again, it's a non-empirical piece where we talk about neurodiversity employment programs, and we talk about what are the upsides of these programs. So, Sean, I know you were mentioning before, you were asking, why are there different articles that I was discussing? So this article is one of two within what we call a point-counterpoint exchange. Again, it's another type of a non-empirical article that we see in academic scholarship. So in this point-counterpoint exchange, you have two articles that present two sides of the same coin. So the article with my team, we talk about, in short, the upsides of neurodiversity employment programs. But for the other article in the collection by Myra Ezrins and her team, they talk about how neurodiversity employment programs could be improved in organizations. So that's where my team, we talk about the upsides, and then Myra's article and team's article, they talk about, again, how these programs could be improved so we could have a holistic conversation about these neurodiversity employment programs in the workplace.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. So a non-empirical, non-quantitative kind of examination of the space, kind of counter or complementary, one side, the other side, and yeah, hopefully leading to just an overall more informed view and conversation on the topic. When it comes to your article, can you give us a little bit more detail of what your process was, what different components of the neuroinclusion space you looked at, and yeah, just kind of break down the sections and kind of areas that you examined in your article?
Sounds great, Sean. So to start the article, first what we talk about is neurodiversity, addressing neurodiversity at work as what we call a grand challenge. So when you submit an article, usually an article goes through multiple rounds of blind review. So I want to thank the blind reviewer who gave us this feedback and give them the credit accordingly. So when we had to go revise the article, one of the reviewers said to talk about neurodiversity at work, again, is a grand challenge. So these are specific, whether we want to conceptualize them as problems or goals that we want to address in society that can bring about different, let's say from a grand challenge, the grand challenge in this case would be, let's say, employing neurodivergent individuals at work and also keeping them employed. So that's where we talk about neurodiversity employment broadly, not just about how do we get neurodivergent people in the door into a workplace, but also how do we keep them at work? So that's where the article first starts with, okay, what is a grand challenge? And then, how is neurodiversity at work a grand challenge? We bring in different statistics from the United Nations as well. So we bring in different statistics from different global leaders that are addressing disability and employment in organizations. So that's how the article starts. And then what we do is we frame theories that could explain how these different programs emerge. So in academia, when we talk about theory is a fancy word for explaining what are different phenomena that we see in the world. Like, why does the world work the way that it does? So we have different theories that could explain why the world or why the workplace, in the case of the field of management, what is an overarching term or an overarching theory that could explain what's going on in the workplace. So, for example, we talk about in our article, we bring in a few different theories that explain how these different neurodiversity employment programs emerge. So one of the examples we bring in is neurodiverse leadership theory. That was published by a team led by Quinetta Roberson. She's over at Michigan State University, and that is in the journal Group and Organization Management. And this theory, what it explains is that neurodivergent employees can bring different unique skills and traits and behaviors into the workplace. And these different skills, traits, and behaviors, there can be direct and indirect relationships to outcomes that, let's say, a neurodivergent employee is regarded as a leader with potential, so their leadership potential. Or let's say if this is someone currently in leadership, let's say they're rated, let's say by their supervisor or another colleague as being an effective leader. So that's where, for example, with the emergence of these neurodiversity employment programs, what we argue is that with these programs, they are meant to educate neurodivergent and non-neurodivergent employees alike about neurodiversity, but it also frames that neurodivergent traits, neurodivergent behaviors, because we know that neurodivergent symptoms can be both a combination of traits and behaviors, that these could be resources in organizations that neurodivergent employees can use to their advantage, and these can be trained. So we especially push back and say that neurodivergence, of course, it could be a deficit at work, but let's keep in mind that it very well can be an advantage at work as well. Let's say being driven like a motor. Let's use that ADHD symptom as an example. Mm-hmm. As a leader, I, especially being neurodivergent myself, I'm proud of the fact that I'm a driven person, driven like a motor to persevere and complete different goals I have in the workplace. So that's an example of an ADHD symptom, I argue, that could be an advantage and could lead to me, let's say, being rated as an effective leader. So we get to recap for our viewers. First, we talk about neurodiversity employment as a grand challenge, and then we bring in different theories that could explain why these neurodiversity employment programs are being implemented in organizations.
Yeah. There were a few things in kind of the exposition of the article that stood out to me. I did really, I had not previously heard the term grand challenge as kind of a framing of these types of scenarios and issues that people take on and try to examine. But I really appreciated that terminology and the definition that you laid out for it. I felt like, as somebody that has been working specifically in this space for over 10 years, it kind of validated that like it is something that takes more than 10 years of effort. It is a really complex situation that deals with complex systems and human behavior and kind of cultural norms and cross-cultural norms when looking at global businesses. So it kind of validated like this is a grand challenge in literal terms. So that was cool. And it also, I think, recognizes the potential significance of making progress towards that grand challenge, that there can be grand benefit to these efforts, not just for the neurodivergent community, but for the world of work, the world of business, innovations and technology, and just kind of moving culture forward. So there's grand benefits there. One other thing that stood out to me was you took a lot of care with defining neurodiversity in one of the early paragraphs. You kind of simultaneously cited multiple different, I would say, viewpoints, both medical and social, into kind of in a good way, a bit of a Frankenstein definition that just kind of gave space to a lot of different perspectives all at once. I'm wondering if you can, for our listeners, before they hopefully go and read the article, just kind of like tell us more about what went into your thought process and the approach of defining neurodiversity as thoughtfully as you did.
Thank you for that compliment, Sean. Really, really appreciate it. And definitely let's take some time with our listeners to break that down. So I would say first, I was honored to work with a team that first has a strong subject matter expertise in the area of neurodiversity. I want to highlight the second author of our team, Nikki Drader-Mazza. I'm a fifth-year candidate over at FIU. She is a fourth-year PhD candidate. And she, even before scoring this publication with myself and the rest of the team, she got a lead author publication of her own in Human Resource Management. It's an FT50 ranked journal. Her and then one of our other authors, Jenny Lopez Kidwell, was on that publication. And they specifically partnered with Specialistern regarding talking about the double empathy problem and neurodiversity employment programs. So they partnered with Specialistern and they conducted interviews in partnership with them. As well, just highlighting the other authors on my team as well. Katie Badura has multiple publications regarding disability at work. Disability is one of her areas of expertise that she lists on her Google Scholar page. And then Tim Munyon as well. He's a department chair over at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville for the Department of Strategy, Entrepreneurship, and Organizations. And he's very active on UT's Neurodiversity Task Force. On my end as well, have multiple presentations and publications regarding neurodiversity. So that's for our listeners as well, grateful that we have a team of people who are active in the space, both engaging with scholars, but also engaging with practitioners. So we especially want to bring in our backgrounds and take seriously that if we are talking about how do we approach the definition of neurodiversity, we hope that we bring in the appropriate background that would justify us being able to pursue why in this article it would be helpful. But we were scanning academic literature. We were seeing different conceptualizations regarding neurodiversity, and especially being neurodivergent myself, we have all these different perspectives here. But we also want to understand the classic phrase, Sean, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. There are different neurodivergent conditions, of course, when you have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia. These are all unique conditions that could have unique symptoms of their own, but also share symptoms with each other. So that's where, with using the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that's where we hear the different definitions of all of these different neurotypes, and we read them in that particular document. So that's where we specifically talk about, we call it neurodevelopmental divergence, because that's where we see, let's say, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, we see those different conditions fall under that category. So we understand that neurodiversity, especially, we cite in our article that there have been challenges regarding defining the term. There have been different points of view, but in some way, shape, or form, as authors, we wanted to be able to bound the type of neurodivergence that we're talking about. So specifically with neurodevelopmental, that's the umbrella term where we would put autism and ADHD would be under that umbrella. You have other types of neurodivergence as well, such as, let's say, neurocognitive, that with neurocognitive divergence, that addresses neurodivergence that could emerge later in life as you age, where specifically neurodevelopmental divergence, that's when, for example, we see, let's say, women later in life are increasingly being diagnosed with ADHD. So that's where with neurodevelopmental diagnosis, you see people being diagnosed both early in life and later in life. Versus, let's say, with neurocognitive divergence, again, a separate section in that DSM, that's where you see those conditions emerge later in life. So that's where on our end, to better understand neurodivergence, we want to understand, especially for the more popular types of neurodivergence being talked about, such as autism, how are they being grouped, and what are those implications, especially in management, especially, let's say, in leadership. There are multiple different types of leadership that we talk about, let's say charismatic, popular one being transformational, but we see over the years that there's been pushback on these different definitions of leadership, and scholars have been questioning, are these really different types of leadership, or are they all pointing to the same type of leadership? So that's where we, especially using leadership as an example, we wanted to take a lot of care in differentiating just these different conditions, but also understanding what is the umbrella they fall under. So especially when organizations are putting forward interventions, we have both the medical, scientific, and the social context as well that could guide future research.
Got it. Great. Yeah, again, I appreciate all the thought and care that went into that. I feel like we also, when we are, trying to work with organizations, we take kind of defining what we're talking about very seriously, but I feel like you all took it to a new level, which I see the need for and appreciate. So let's get into, what some of the takeaways from the article were, some of the takeaways from, your examination of different approaches and different applications in the space. So I'll turn it over to you to just kind of share a little bit of an abstract with our listeners of what you took away from your time studying the process.
I'd say especially the importance of these programs, not only to get neurodivergent people in the door, but also that there is value in retaining your neurodivergent employees, especially. We live, obviously right now, Sean, we could see across the world, it has been hard for people, especially on the job market, to find employment. We see multiple people that are being laid off. So we see in general, finding a job, keeping a job, that has become a challenge in and of itself for organizations today. Let's say, especially in the tech sector as well. There was I believe a LinkedIn article that was published regarding how especially the tech industry is struggling with both hiring employees and especially laying off employees as well. So that, let's say, especially keeping in mind for organizations that it's not just important for us to address, okay, how do we get neurodivergent people in the door, but understanding for those that are in the door, they have important advantages that they can offer organizations that are unique. So again, we highlight again that with any sort of neurodivergence, of course it could be a deficit. Of course it could be a disadvantage. But on our end, we want to broaden the conversation to make very clear how it could be an advantage. Even in, I've been working on my dissertation as well, Sean, where I interview 60 leaders that are diagnosed with ADHD. And even just reflecting on going through that dissertation, yes, neurodivergence could still be conceptualized as a disadvantage, but how specifically can it also be an advantage in organizations, and how could it function as an advantage? Let's say for you as a neurodivergent leader, for you to develop other people to lead on your team. So that's where, as I reflect on the publication, I also reflect on the work I'm doing with my dissertation as well. But I would say the takeaway for me is that there are programs important to retain the current employees that you have, that there needs to, in general, be more education about neurodiversity, not only in the field of management, but also in other fields as well. And especially we bring up this great program from Microsoft as well. If I'm looking at one of the programs that we highlight, where specifically it was a leadership development program from Microsoft that educated different leaders about neurodiversity. So the importance as well that it's not only important to educate the neurodivergent employees, but it's important to educate everybody about neurodiversity. At the end of the day, when we talk about neurodiversity, it includes both the neurodivergent employees and neurotypical employees that, let's say, don't have a neurodivergent diagnosis. But I appreciate the trend in scholarship that we're seeing that having this combination of disabilities is important. There's a great article that we talk about in the Point Counterpoint. It's by David Dwortman, and it is an administrative science quarterly. But what they find, they talk about this idea of disability diversity, where you have a combination of people on your team with different disabilities, and how those can, when you have those different combinations, I believe in their publication, they spoke about how it was measured binarily, but that's where they find some positive outcomes regarding creativity and idea generation when you have this mixture of people that specifically have different types of disabilities. Again, it was measured, let's say, binarily versus, let's say, multiple different types. So I believe there was a yes or no format or measure with that, and then they were able to find the outcomes. But still, it points to, for future research, that when you have this different combination of people with different neurodivergent conditions, whether you have someone, let's say, with autism and with dyslexia and with ADHD, if you have all of these differences here on one team, that could lead to positive outcomes for the individual, for the team, for the organization. So that's where, as we were going through writing this and documenting the different programs at different employment life cycles, we just felt like we were wowed by seeing, here are the different ways that neurodivergence can be an advantage, and at the different levels. There are different implications regarding whether there's an individual outcome or a team outcome or a firm level or organizational outcome. So understanding especially that at all of these different levels of the organization, neurodivergence has a role to play, not just for the positive outcome for the individual and not just for the neurodivergent employee. Everybody in the organization should be educated about what disability and neurodiversity can offer.
Yeah, and neuroinclusion is not just an entry level area of focus. It does, because a lot of programs kind of limit their, if they're hiring focus, they limit their hiring scope to entry level roles or just internships, which are a great opportunity for those folks that align with them. But yeah, as you're saying, there one is a much broader community out there, potential leaders, a lot of whom, as you alluded to, kind of trend towards entrepreneurship because they're not always welcomed in the traditional corporate environment. But a lot of those traditional corporations could really benefit from having open arms to that kind of talent profile at an upper level kind of position. So there is, a diversity of applications there. And another thing that you mentioned, I can kind of tie back to what I've gotten to see in my experience, far more anecdotally, but is that the diversity of disabilities, one thing that, especially in, I would say, the mid to late 20 teens, as you kind of outline a bit of timeline of how these programs have progressed and proliferated over the 2020s, or sorry, the 2000s. But in my observation, again, in like sort of the late teens, there was a little bit of, okay, what does a hiring program look like? And there were some models where the organization was seeking one neurotype to work with a number of people of that same neurotype towards a particular project or in a particular team. And the feedback from the community and just kind of observationally was like, well, doesn't that defeat the point of inclusion, of kind of bringing in these out, kind of historically excluded individuals and then putting them in a silo to only interact with each other? One, that's a little ick, and two, it doesn't yield the benefits that you're looking for, because the benefits really come from that diversity of disabilities, and of course in integrating that in with the neurotypicals on the team that inevitably are there as well. There's so much more to gain there. So I want to kind of shift over to kind of the next logical step, as you've kind of outlined what you were examining and the takeaway that there is benefit to be gained. Can you tell us more about what are those upsides that businesses see that warrant, that say we need to examine this more, we need to do more of this? What were some of the impacts of these programs that you observed?
That's where specifically I appreciate, Sean, that you brought up, like, use the word anecdotally. So that's where, especially what we've seen, to address that question and provide context. What we've seen is that there are studies in the field of management about individuals and their neurodivergent symptoms. So let me give an example from the entrepreneurship space. There's a great article in Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, the U et al. 2021, which we cite in our publication. And they find an indirect relationship using a sample of founder CEOs. So the publication intersects both entrepreneurship and strategic management. They find an indirect relationship between hyperactive impulsive ADHD symptoms and firm performance, positive indirect relationship. So we're seeing that, wow, you have the CEO of your organization. Here again, it's in the entrepreneurship context. You have the CEO of your organization whose hyperactive impulsive ADHD symptoms, the frequency of those can lead to positive performance outcomes for your organization. It's wild. So again, the importance of neurodivergence at the firm level. So from the publication, we argue, yes, we have these publications about the symptoms of the individual, but still, anecdotally, from an academic point of view, or from academic articles, there are very few publications that say, okay, from the implementation of these programs, here are the specific outcomes that we're seeing. So my colleague, again, Nikki Drader-Mazza and her team, they bring in interview data regarding talking about these programs, but there is plenty of room for future research to especially study directly from the programs themselves. Let's say from an individual going through the program, rather than the outcomes from that individual going through the program, and let's say how's the person rated, let's say, regarding their performance, regarding their leadership potential, regarding their leadership effectiveness. So we bring in, again, these different theories in management themselves, but different publications about the individuals who are neurodivergent, and use that context to spearhead that we need to study these programs themselves and the outcomes where scholars and practitioners could collaborate together. Now let me highlight your wonderful organization, Neurodiversity in the Workplace. We bring up your organization as an external partner because you partner with a variety of different firms regarding neurodiversity. So that's where we bring up, we call them external partner programs, because these are programs that could originate, that Neurodiversity in the Workplace specifically is spearheading as the external partner, and then the different organization itself is implementing those programs versus, let's say, the leadership development program, to my knowledge, from Microsoft. That was a program within Microsoft that was implemented by Microsoft versus, let's say, program generated by Neurodiversity in the Workplace that then is implemented by the organization. But what we see is that we need more research in the academic space, specifically about the programs, in addition to continuing research about the individuals. So I appreciated just putting together the publication. We highlight specific executives from different firms that have been open about their own neurodivergence. So you see, again, from both scholar, from that Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice article that I mentioned, and then a practitioner point of view where you have executives talking about their own neurodivergence and why it's helpful, and then colleagues commenting on that. We see at the strategic level neurodivergence can lead to positive organizational outcomes. But we know just from, let me bring in this other theory called upper echelons theory, which talks about how the characteristics of your top management team can trickle down and impact different levels of the organization. That's where we see, when we think about neurodivergence being important strategically, and we see, again, scholar and practitioner evidence for that. We want to understand throughout the organization how these different neurodivergent symptoms or these neurodivergent traits that could be positive, again, how can they benefit, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, all different levels of the organization. But the reality is that, yes, there have been different percentages we talk about regarding how neurodiversity employment programs have been helpful in the workplace, regarding how teams have worked together, but we need more scholarly evidence regarding why these programs are working, and scholars partner with practitioners. I really appreciate the work of, it's the Neurodiversity at Work Research Conference. Myself and then your director, Joe Riddle, we've gone multiple years in a row. And that's such a wonderful place for scholars and practitioners to connect with each other to really close this divide between academic circles and industry circles. So I'm big on bridging that divide, and I'm grateful, Sean, that you and we all can work together to close that divide. But I would say specifically, that's why I, of course, want to be careful in my phrasing that, again, organizations do have results from these programs, and I want to be careful not to assume that this is anecdotal evidence. That wouldn't be fair to the hard work that they are doing. But I could say from an academic point of view, we know next to nothing about whether the outcomes specifically from neurodiversity employment programs, and we need more research in this area, especially now with how more difficult the job market is getting, and how we are seeing, again, people either getting laid off, people having to, let's say, take positions with lower pay. Especially, it is vital to see, especially how we can develop our internal talent and not unnecessarily lay people off that can, in the long run, contribute positively to the organization, but also flourish in the organization as well. So the other thing I would say, as well as I reflect on the article, is that it's important in designing these programs that it's important that we need to listen to neurodivergent employees themselves. So that's where it's not only about, let's say, the top management team discussing what's important on their end, but let's hear different employee input of those who are living. Like myself, I'm openly neurodivergent. It's important that we listen to, regarding whether it's a neurodiversity employment program or any sort of training program, it's important that we consult people at all levels of the organization to put that program together. Because again, when you've met one person with autism, the assumptions that someone, let's say, who's not neurodivergent could have about neurodiversity could be wrong. So while we see plenty of upsides regarding these programs, it's important that we all work together. We respect each other's expertise and different backgrounds in developing these programs.
Thank you for listening. As a reminder, this is part 1 of our conversation with Andrew Millin. You can find Andrew on LinkedIn, and you can access the article in the Journal of Organizational Behavior either through the platform ResearchGate or by contacting Andrew directly. Be sure to tune in for our next episode, where we will talk through more of Andrew's findings and their implications for neurodiversity programs and future research.